All right, it is hard to believe that it's been 10 years since the decision. LeBron James leaving Cleveland for Miami, and it wasn't just that he left, it was the way that he left. And really excited to catch up with our next guest, Donovan Natta Jr., host and producer of Backstory, coming up on Sunday night, documentary about that fateful day and what went into it. And Don joins the show now on a Friday. Don, how are you, sir?
Doing great, sir. How are you?
Doing really well. Couldn't be more excited for this. I listened to the Daily this morning with you and Mina, and heard you unpack some of the things as far as teasing what we're going to see on Sunday night. Couple of questions here. Let's just start with the origin story of the doc, the process, how the idea came up, and ultimately how the execution led to it becoming a reality.
There's such a fascinating origin story to the decision because it came from this incredibly surprising source. In November of 2009, a guy named Drew, don't know his last name, just a guy named Drew from Columbus, Ohio, wrote an email to Bill Simmons for Bill Simmons' mailbag column that Bill used to write for ESPN.com. And Drew said in that email, LeBron James should announce his free agency decision coming up that summer, live on ABC. Bill loved the idea, responded, it's a great idea. Actually, LeBron should sell it for pay-per-view for $45 a viewer. But Bill took the idea, and he pitched it to Maverick Carter, LeBron James's business partner, Leon Rose, LeBron James's agent at the time, Worldwide Wes, William Wesley, the advisor at the time to LeBron, in Dallas in February of 2010 at the NBA All-Star Weekend. So Simmons is pitching an idea that a reader gave him a few months earlier to LeBron's people. Simmons also pitched it to ESPN executives. And then for months, Simmons inside ESPN was banging the drum for ESPN to do the decision show. But none of Simmons' bosses took his advice to pursue it. It never really got any traction until June when Ari Emanuel, the Hollywood super agent, was at the NBA Finals in L.A. with Maverick Carter, LeBron's business partner, and Jim Gray, the veteran broadcaster, and they discussed it. And Jim Gray has said publicly it was his idea that he pitched it to Maverick Carter. And it was not until Ari Emanuel took what he told John Skipper, the head of ESPN, was Jim Gray's idea for the decision that it was finally greenlit by the network. So it's just fascinating that, you watch the show that night and it was an awkward hour of television and nobody knew that Drew from Columbus, Ohio had the first idea for it 8 months earlier.
That's incredible. What other new pieces of information, Don, were you able to uncover? I mean, look, obviously, for people like you and I that are in this business, we know the story. And for most sports fans, they either remember or have learned about it since. What other things, and obviously I don't want you to give away, everything, but what are some other things that you learned that are new that we're going to learn on Sunday night?
Well, one of the things that I was really surprised to find out is how much then NBA Commissioner David Stern hated this idea. I mean, it was known that Stern was not a fan of the decision. He had said that previously at a press conference and some other interviews that he had done. But the reason why he didn't like it and how hard he pushed ESPN to cancel the show was not known. So Stern called John Skipper, the former ESPN president, who at the time was head of ESPN content, and basically begged ESPN to cancel the decision broadcast in the days leading up to it. And I interviewed Skipper on camera for the Backstory episode that'll premiere Sunday night, and Skipper told me the reason why Stern didn't want ESPN to broadcast it is because ESPN was giving too much power to one player, that LeBron would be in control. And LeBron really was. LeBron and Maverick Carter, it was their hour. ESPN donated that hour for free to LeBron and Maverick Carter. All of the sponsors that we saw that night, the money that was raised went to charity given by LeBron's family foundation to the Boys and Girls Club, more than $2 million. And so that was another thing that I had no idea about as I was watching it. how much David Stern hated the idea and how hard he had lobbied ESPN to try to cancel it because he just didn't want the player to have that much control. And when you look back now, Stern was prescient. This really was the launching pad for player empowerment in the NBA. We now have players moving teams, not even through free agency, just through demanding trades like Anthony Davis and Jimmy Butler and other players. And a lot of that can be traced back to what LeBron did the night of the decision.
It was such an incredible misstep, Don, for a guy like LeBron who has had such a bulletproof NBA career, decision-making, obviously who he is as a player, the greatest of this generation. Were you able to uncover anything that would indicate, like, when everybody knew it was such a dumpster fire, maybe right before, maybe during, right after? Like, when did LeBron's team realize that they had really, really missed the mark with this?
Well, Maverick Carter, LeBron's childhood friend and his business partner, really wanted to do this. I think that Maverick Carter was far more into it than LeBron ever was. And interestingly, we found out that in the days leading up to the decision broadcast, Leon Rose, LeBron's agent, who, as I said, was in those discussions with Simmons back in February about this idea, and World Wide West soured on the idea. They knew LeBron was going to announce that he was leaving Cleveland and going to Miami most likely that night of the decision, and they could see that this could easily backfire on LeBron. And so they were very strongly behind the scenes telling the inner circle of LeBron, this thing can backfire. This thing is not a good idea. But they weren't able to throw their bodies in front of the runaway train at that point. And actually their prediction that it could backfire is exactly what ended up happening. The other thing is LeBron did very little preparation for that interview with Jim Gray. Jim Gray asked him 23 questions before he asked him, what's your decision? If you remember, it was, where's the powder? Are you a nail biter? All sorts of inane questions that clearly frustrated a national audience of 10 million people. And LeBron did very little prep. That week he was at his basketball camp in Akron, his Nike-sponsored basketball camp. He arrived in Greenwich at 6 o'clock. He was very busy in the hours leading up to the broadcast, shooting promos for his sponsors that night with Jim Gray at a house in Greenwich, Connecticut. He had dinner that night with Kanye West. Kanye was there that night for the decision. And so LeBron was very distracted, spent very little time preparing, and had no idea Jim Gray was going to ask so many questions, people around him told me. And, when you watch, you could see not only was he uncomfortable, but LeBron was giving very short answers to all those questions as if to sort of say, let's get on with it. It's almost as if LeBron seemed to think as he was sitting there, yeah, these warnings that I heard are coming true. This is a really bad look for me to be announcing I'm leaving my hometown team for Miami. And, of course, he made it much worse with his word selection when he said, I'm taking my talents to South Beach.
Don Van Natta Jr. is our guest. You can get him on Twitter at DVN Jr., host and producer of Backstory. Coming up on Sunday, cannot wait for what they've been able to uncover about the decision, the fateful day when LeBron James announced on ESPN he was, quote, taking his talents to South Beach. Don, what was it like for you watching that in real time? I read that Buzz Bissinger called it the TV equivalent to waterboarding, and obviously your tweet is something that a lot of people remember from that night. What was it like for a guy like you that has seen so many things to watch that in real time?
Well, I was at the New York Times in 2010. I was not hired by ESPN until January of 2012. And as a reporter for the Times, I was made uncomfortable by what ESPN had to do to get the show. They donated this hour to LeBron and Maverick Carter, and it appeared to me from where I was sitting at that time that it was, ESPN got an exclusive by basically giving this hour to LeBron. It was a trade that, an access kind of deal that made me uncomfortable. And I tweeted about it. I had a number of tweets about it, and we used one of them in the show. And I asked Skipper the question that occurred to me back in 2010 when I was watching. I simply asked him on camera for this episode, did LeBron use ESPN or did ESPN use LeBron? His answer to that is kind of revealing. He said it was mutual use. He said, LeBron got a platform that he wanted to do this and to become LeBron and Maverick Carter wanted to be the producers of this event, and ESPN allowed them to do that. And what ESPN got is they were the center of the sports universe and had this exclusive and attracted the largest audience for a non-sporting event, a non-live sporting event in its history. I mean, to this day, The Decision is the most watched studio show in ESPN history.
You know, LeBron is not the only person in the world that is not perfect. In fact, all of us are, and that's just part of life. Were you able to learn anything that maybe LeBron took from that day that has allowed him to learn? And look, he is our generation's alpha male in the NBA. What he says goes in the league, as Patrick Beverley spoke about a couple of weeks ago. What do you think LeBron ultimately learned from that day, which was, again, just such a horrible misstep?
Well, that's a great question. That's one of the reasons we decided to do this episode. We certainly wanted to get the backstory, the origin stories I described, and in the hours and days leading up to it and the aftermath. But we also wanted to look what the legacy of the show was for LeBron. And, LeBron expressed some regrets for the way the decision was handled just a few months after that. And remember, that first year in Miami, he really was vilified in every NBA arena. He was roundly booed, and he sort of reluctantly embraced that villain role. And, of course, at the end of that season, when the Heat lost on their home floor to the Dallas Mavericks in the finals, a lot of people around the country really enjoyed that. And he knew that. LeBron knew that. But I think what happened, and this is the way the reporting really played out, is what was going on that night. There was a lot of sort of revolutionary things happening that we didn't see then that we now see. One of them is that LeBron and Maverick Carter had always wanted to be in control of their own narrative, and storytellers, executive producers of their own shows, and storytellers that would package shows for multiple networks. This was the first chance to do that. And they started two media production companies, Spring Hill Entertainment in 2013 and Uninterrupted in 2014. And just this week, we learned that $100 million is being invested with Maverick Carter and LeBron James's media company now called Spring Hill Company for all sorts of new storytelling ventures. And this was a trial run at that. And, they made a lot of mistakes that first night. Live TV is very difficult, as Maverick Carter discovered. But they kept on, and they are now. I mean, LeBron Inc. is a force to be reckoned with, and certainly the other legacy, as I discussed, is player empowerment. Mike Wilbon on the show that's going to premiere Sunday night told me that really what LeBron did was he showed his fellow athletes, Mike calls them his fellow artists, what's possible, and the building of super teams and not being as an NBA player, shackled down just by a contract necessarily, and to try to, if you demand a trade, as Anthony Davis has done and Jimmy Butler and other players have done, you can get out from even what you're doing. A fair amount of that can be traced to LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh putting that big three super team together in the way that they did in 2010.
Last thing, Don, we'll set you loose on this, or after this, I should say. Is there anything, because I was reading some of the comments from Chris Broussard, and he was talking about how, as a result of what's going on right now in our country, the societal issues that are not new but are right in front of our face, does that add to any of the content we're going to see on Sunday night, if that makes sense?
It does. And, I asked Broussard about that. Broussard was discussing the Comic Sans letter that Cleveland Cavaliers owner Dan Gilbert put out, and said that Gilbert was talking about LeBron as if he owned him, and just how offended he was by that. But I asked Mike Wilbon the question about Black America's view of the decision versus white America, and Wilbon says it all comes down to control, because many blacks across the country saw the decision as a move by LeBron to be independent and to be empowered. But there were some people, some white Americans who did not see it that way and saw it as a very negative thing. So we do deal with that, and we also deal with LeBron, finding his voice. He's easily the most outspoken and influential American athlete right now, and weighs in on social issues, on political issues, on issues of race. He's been doing that. He's been a trailblazer in that way for years, and we also explore that as well on the episode on Sunday night.
And since you're on radio in Salt Lake City, Don, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention that our very own Donovan Mitchell was in attendance at the decision live. Were you able to talk to him at all?
I was not, but Lisa Salters did. So Lisa Salters, my colleague for E60, did a terrific piece. And in fact, I posted it on my Twitter feed, a clip of it. Outside the Lines did several minutes of it when I was on there with Jeremy Schaap the other day, talking about that. And it's a terrific piece, and I urge all your listeners to go find it that Lisa Salters did for E60.
Right on. Well, Don, you are a master at your craft. I've told you that before. When you have a chance to join us, we really appreciate it. I am juiced for Sunday night. I have the DVR set, so appreciate all your work. Stay safe, be well, and we'll chat again, okay?
Thank you. I look forward to it. Appreciate you saying that, and you stay safe as well.
No doubt. There he is, Don Van Natta Jr., who is really one of the better investigative reporters that you're going to find.